So, Sean, let's jump right in. Just do a few
Sure.
introductions for everyone. Sean Lang is a consultant from Interprovincial Roof Consultants. We're just going to walk everyone today through the basics of roofing renewals, maintenance, inspections, talk to you about some of your warranties, your purchasing options, how you can coordinate a new roofing system. And of course, one of the most important things is planning for your roofing renewal. And I believe, Sean, you guys are the sponsor this week. So you get to talk and you get to sponsor, which is kind of great. Thank you very much for all of those great things. Sean's happy to respond to everyone's email questions. So there's his email address and their phone number. If you have any questions, by all means, please feel free to give Sean a call, and he's happy to help you coordinate your project. Reminder to everybody, we do record the webinars. They do get posted to the CHOA website. Use the Q&A function if you have questions. We've already received about 10 questions in advance, which we've tried to address already through the presentation. So thank you for those questions. It's a privacy issue, so don't identify your specific strata plan number or business or personal information. And of course, we will try and get to your questions, as many as we can, before we round out at 1 o'clock. So everybody, hopefully have a great time. So Sean, we'll do this a little interactively. I'm going to let you just kind of run away with the slides, but I know there are a lot of common questions that our members ask frequently, and that might kind of help with the process. But I'll let you just take it away, and I'll jump in as a case arises.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So as the slide shows, the roof system is basically covering 100% of your investment. It is the rain cap that protects everything within your building. And even though the walls and the grounds and the plumbing and the electrical are all very important components of the building, the roof system, which can be on decks and balconies as well, is integral in making sure that all those underlying components are going to be kept in good shape for the life of your building. And a lot of times those components within the building are meant to last longer than, say, a weather-affected roof system. So the weather does affect a roof system and can really shorten the life of a roof system or cause detrimental effects to it, depending on where you are and that sort of thing. So it's a key component, something that you definitely have to pay a lot of attention to. Main priorities when you're talking about a roof system are going to be the performance of the roof system. What kind of performance is it going to give you? Is it going to last you as long as the warranty claims it's going to last? Is it going to give you worry-free service for that period of time? Is it going to look the way that you want it to look? If it's one of those roofs like the one behind me, where it's a shingle roof and you can see it, or it might be a flat roof system where you can't see the roof. It's on top of the building, you've got some parapet walls, you can't actually see the roof. Prevention, obviously we're going to be preventing water ingress into the building. We're going to be protecting all the assets inside. And risk management is, how much are you going to spend on the roof system in order to make sure that you're minimizing the amount of risk that you're taking. Sometimes the cost of the roof system is a major component in your decision making, and sometimes that worrying about cost of the roof is actually the worst thing you can do. Particularly on a flat roof, because a flat roof is very much like a bathtub where it's going to hold a lot of water. And if you're going to be thrifty on a flat roof, you may actually be costing yourself more money in the long run. Can we advance the slide, Tony? So this is an example, exploded view of a typical sloped roof system on a single family residence, just showing the different components of the system. You've got the insulation, you've got the framework that's actually holding up the deck sheathing. You've got the sheathing, which is the plywood that the roof system is actually secured to and laying on. It's providing support for the roof system. You have your underlayments, which are sort of like a secondary form of waterproofing protection, and they also protect the sheathing from being bonded to by the asphalt shingles, because sometimes that can happen if the attic system gets too hot, and if the products that you've installed actually have some kind of adhesive on the back side of them. And then of course you have the shingles, and they could be either asphalt shingles, they could be cedar shakes, they could be metal tiles, they could be metal panels. There's numerous different types of products that you can put on a sloped roof. But the most integral component in all of this, and all of this is integral, but one of the key factors that often gets overlooked is venting. And properly venting a roof system can shorten the life or can increase the life of a roof system. If you don't vent it well enough, you can kill the roof faster. Because what happens is within that attic space, the heat builds up and it actually will roast the roof from the inside. And that's where you can have problems with adhesives breaking down and actually bonding materials to the deck, or the actual oils within the asphalt shingles, in the case of asphalt shingles, might disintegrate over time and be evaporated out of the shingle, causing them to get brittle, and they'll fail really quickly. So all of these factors within the structure of your building can affect the performance of the roof system. Next slide, Tony. So there's a few things that you have to pay attention to when you own a roof. And a lot of people don't really understand that they own a roof and they're responsible for the roof, and they have to remember they have a roof. I don't know how many times I get called to a building and people are like, oh, well, we never even thought about our roof until it leaked on our piano. So it's an integral component that's often forgotten. And you actually want to be able to forget it, but at the same time, you really should be remembering it. It's something that should be installed properly, a set it and forget it sort of scenario. You don't have to think about it once it's done, except for routine maintenance. And routine maintenance is something that can often lead to problems if you don't do it. So having your roof reviewed annually, or in some cases semi-annually, depending on the location of the roof, depending on the amount of trees near the building, depending on the wind that's hitting the building, if you're located on the coast or on the side of a hill where you're constantly getting buffeted by winds. All these different components can factor into the reliability and dependability of a roof system. If you have a lot of trees around a building, they may look pretty, but if they're overhanging the building, they can not only be dropping their leaves and needles or whatever they are onto the roof and causing drains to get plugged, causing buildups behind vents, causing buildups behind skylights and in valleys that divert water that's supposed to run down the roof system into the roof system. So on a sloped roof system, the roof is designed to shed water, not to hold water. So all the components are overlapped in such a way that the water can run over one component onto the other and then off the building into a gutter system, or in some cases, no gutter, just off the building. So in the event that you have debris gathering on those types of roof systems that are designed to rely on gravity, that debris causes water to pool behind it and can create an actual level surface of mud behind a chimney, behind a skylight, behind a vent like what you see in the background behind me. And the water will get diverted sideways into the roof system, and then ultimately find a nail hole, find a rip in the underlayment, find a vent hole, whatever it may be, and get into your building. So if you don't do the maintenance on the building regularly, depending again on the other features, you could be running into problems that are going to either cause leakage that's immediate and you notice it right away, which hopefully that's the kind of leak you get because they're easily correctable. The damage is less. Because you can deal with it right away. But the worst kind of leak is one that happens over time. It's a slow leak, you don't notice it. And it comes into your attic space. It might be coming in a little bit and raining on your rafters and getting your insulation wet, but it doesn't seep through your vapor barrier on the top side of your gypsum ceiling. And the water just sits there, and it can cause rot to happen. It can cause mold to happen. It can cause all kinds of problems that you don't even notice. And then one day, all these components start to fail even more, and now the leak becomes so big that it does come into your building. But in the meantime, all those other components have been damaged. Now the cost of the repair is extensive. So doing things like cleaning drains, scuppers, overflows, gutters, all that sort of thing, it may seem like a no-brainer, but it's actually a very technically important thing to do. Even with the gutter system, if you don't clean your gutters, you may not think much about it, and you may think that, well, so what, they'll overflow and they'll come out the front side of the gutter. But no, in some cases, the gutters are high enough that the water can actually back up into the roof system, up into your soffit, and particularly if you don't have a self-adhesive heat protection in place. So depending on the way that your roof system was built, not cleaning your gutters can cause problems that way. And that's assuming you have external gutters. If you have internal gutters or built-in gutters, the kind that you can't see, you have a sloped roof, but you can't see your gutters, they're commonly installed with a single ply membrane, quite often done incorrectly because it's cheap and easy to do by anybody that's not technically trained. But those kind are really a problem if they start to leak, and if they get full, they can hold a lot more volume of water because of the nature of their design. So doing proper maintenance is a huge, huge important issue when it comes to owning a roof system. So who should do the work? First of all, no homeowner should be going up on their roof unless they're trained in fall protection safety. It's very important that when you're going up on a roof system that you're taking all of the precautionary measures to make sure that you're safe. If you're a handy person and you can go up and do the work yourself, you're used to swinging a hammer and you know you can do it, that's great. But you should learn how to do it safely, and you should be learn how to use a harness and a rope tied to a safety anchor. And they're actually a very cheap setup to buy. You can buy a harness in a bucket, roofer's safety kit, where it comes with an anchor and a rope and everything, and you can install it on your roof. However, the act of installing that anchor on the roof has to be done properly, or that can cause leaks as well. So there's a number of factors that go into it, and that's why I always highly recommend that if you need something done on a roof, call a roofer. I mean, these guys have the insurance coverage for their own safety, their compo coverage. They know how to work on a roof system. They can do the work quicker and faster and more efficiently and properly. And you know, they're going to charge you, obviously, but you're paying for that, them taking the risk and not you taking the risk. And also you have somebody to lean on if they don't fix it properly, versus yourself. You can only, you know, get mad at yourself if your roof still leaks after you fell off. So it's very important that you make sure the right technicians are doing the work on the roof, but it's also important, if you have a really complicated roof system, to make sure that the roof is being reviewed by somebody who's going to give you an impartial opinion on what needs to be done. This is what we do as a company, where we are impartial third-party roof inspectors, and we'll go onto a building and we'll tell you as the homeowner what should be done and what can be deferred and what might be unnecessary work. So quite often we get asked by an owner of a building to review a potential scope of work from a roofing contractor who's tried to sell them a bill of goods. And we'll go through that list and compare it to what we actually see on a roof system, and we'll let the owners know whether or not it's appropriate that what the items that the roofer is listing should be corrected. And in a lot of cases, actually, we'll look at the cost that they're planning to charge as well to see if it's an actual fair fee for the work that they're planning to do. So we act as an intermediary for all that. Roofing renewals may seem like a simple task, but it's not always a simple task. It can be a very complicated process. It can be a very involved process. It can be a very lengthy process. It can be costly in a number of ways. I mean, I'm involved in a lot of projects. Some of them can run into the couple of $1 million projects for large warehouse buildings or really complicated commercial buildings. Even some strata complex buildings where there's numerous, 150 different townhouses. Those projects can run in the million plus, 2 million for the roof replacement cost. So getting it done right the first time and designed properly, and the right products installed and the right project flow during the course of construction are all integral parts of making sure that that huge investment gets undertaken properly. So you need to do a few things in order to make sure that that's going to happen. You could call a roofer up and you could say, Mr. Roofer, we just want you to come in and put a roof on. What are you going to do and how much is it going to cost? And quite often the roofer will give you a one-page quote, sometimes two, but it's very quick, usually very minimal in detail. And those are designed specifically so that they are not held to account to a whole lot of detailing. They can just breeze in and do the roofing the way they normally do it, which they know makes money for them using the products that they get a good deal on, and they put on that roof system in a way that actually benefits them because they're making more money off you. They're not necessarily installing the roof system that you need for your buildings at the cost that you should be paying. So as I just kind of mentioned, a lot of roofers are getting good deals on products. I don't even know where we're at, Tony, with the slides. So you can follow me along. I'm just babbling.
Okay.
Roofers usually, particularly the larger roofing companies, will get a great deal on a certain product because they buy at volume. So when they're doing millions of squares worth of work every year, supplier X, manufacturer Y will work out a great deal so that they can sell that person's or that company's products as much as they can. And the roofing contractor can come to you as the owner of the building and say, I can do a hell of a job for you and much cheaper than that guy. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the product that he's installing is right. So he may get a great deal on a very low budget shingle, for instance, but in your situation, depending on the type of building you have, you might want this sort of middle of the road shingle. You might want a high end shingle. We don't know at this point. He may be getting a deal on underlayments that are okay, but not really the best in performance. And he's going to pass that deal on to himself, but he's going to charge you for the normal cost of roofing, or just a little bit less than what the normal market rate is to make sure he gets the job. So this is where having a proper specification designed by somebody who's not benefiting from the process of picking or installing the roof is a key thing. So a consultant can come in and look at your buildings and discuss with you what problems you've had, first of all. And that's usually the way we approach it. We'll go in and we'll say, well, what's the problem? And quite often we'll do a condition report on the roof to find out what state it's in, how much life it's got left, what problems it has. We'll listen to the owners talk about the leakage that's been occurring recently, the historical leakage on the building and problems they've had with the building. It could be rodent access through certain areas of the roof that they need to have corrected. So we have to listen to all these issues, and then we have to try and address them when we're designing a new roof system. So for instance, a roofer might say, I'm going to come in and change all your shingles, but he's not going to talk about, in his scope of work that's 1 page long, he's not going to talk about the wall detailing. So is he going to actually take apart the siding and roll the underlayment up the walls as per building code requirement and put in new step flashings and then reassemble all your siding? And when he does reassemble your siding, is there a cost per square foot for any replacement pieces that get damaged during that process? Because quite often, particularly with wood siding, you're going to be dealing with very brittle product that's 30 years old, and you now have to take it off gently and try and put it back on, and it doesn't often survive that process. So you don't necessarily know the full extent of that replacement until they get into it. You can't take off the lower 2 boards of a wall that's very brittle without possibly damaging the third. So it's very difficult to try and price that in as part of the project. You need to price it in as a separate price. So we always try to do that as part of the specifications and design package when we're doing our bidding process, to try and get as many of these mystery costs itemized in some way. So for instance, if you tear off a roof and there's some plywood that needs to be replaced because there was a leak that was going on for a couple of years, nobody noticed it, but here we go, there's some plywood that's rotten. Do we know how much they're going to charge for that sheet of plywood? Or are we going to let them now come up with a mystery price after they've been hired and they've already started the project, where a typical cost for a piece of plywood to be installed might be $80 per sheet? At this point, they've got you and they can hold you hostage, and they could charge you $300 per sheet. So having all of this done beforehand, having a design developed that addresses all the existing building issues, having a design developed that's going to improve things the way that you might want to improve them. Let's say you had a black roof on before, it was a very low budget shingle. You want to spend a little bit of money and you want to put on something that's a little bit more architecturally eye-pleasing. You can see the multiple colors in the brown roof behind me. These are the decisions that need to be made before you actually start calling in a roofing contractor, because they can affect the scope of the work and the pricing and everything. And you can see some of the hardware behind me on the roof. The choice of what kind of hardware, what kind of vents, what quality of vents, which ones will work for the long term, which ones have we had problems with. And one of the benefits to being a consultant and an inspector is that we get to go on to a number of roofs every year and review them, both new being installed roofs or 30, 25, 20-year-old roofs, and we get to see what's worked and what hasn't worked. And sometimes we're looking at 5-year-old roofs and we can see problems that have occurred in 5-year-old roofs. So we really get firsthand knowledge and experience with reviewing not just one roofing contractor's work, but every roofing contractor's work and every kind of roof system. So we're sort of like a hub where we get to bring all this knowledge together that we garner from going through all this legwork going on all these buildings. And we get to bring that to you and apply it to your building when we're looking at your specific roof.
Sean, I was going to just say, now you've gone rogue on the presentation. So this is a good time
Yes.
for Good time for a
Yeah,
question for everybody.
I quite often do that.
That's okay. I do too. That one of the issues that has come up with our members, and this happens almost on a weekly basis on roofing, is that the strata councils, everybody knows a roofer, or somebody, someone talks to a company, or a company's been by to give you an assessment, but they get three quotes, but the three quotes really don't mean anything unless absolutely everyone is bidding on the same specifications. Because without that, there is no way to compare whether the quote 1, 2, or 3, regardless of price, whether the material or the products are credible products, installation, cycles of construction, and all the detailing that has to happen with the removal and replacement of the roofing system. So, how do you, I don't know, how do you deal with, or how do you combat that with kind of the public perception that, we constantly have this impression that, well, if I use a consultant, it's going to cost more. But I have to say that in my direct experience with several roofs I've supervised in the last 2 years that have been replaced for stratas, I have to say that our best pricing really came from the ability to set specifications and then go out to the top 10 companies to get competitive pricing.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Tony. And it's similar to going out and just saying, I want to buy a car. Give me 3 prices for a car. Well, what kind of car? What kind of seats? What kind of stereo? All these things need to be outlined so that you can get competitive pricing. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the prices that come in after you've outlined completely all the detailing that has to happen are going to be, within $2 of each other, because each contractor is going to look at things slightly differently depending on their workload, depending on the number of men that they have to commit to a project. So there are still a lot of factors that come into play, but at least you're dealing with the same set of instructions. So that part is the same. And you can then quantify and analyze all the other options that may be contributing to that price increase. For instance, if a contractor is $100,000 higher than the next guy on a project, why? And you can ask him and he'll say, well, I've allowed for scaffolding around the whole building, right? Well, that may not have been outlined in the specification or in each contractor's individual scope of work. So, or if it wasn't outlined in a specification, for instance, that we wrote, it's an attack on the job, the way that they're going to attack the job that they chose to do that's driven up their cost. And you would at least be able to define that as a separate issue rather than being part of the actual roof system installation. So you could say, well, I'll choose contractor A because he's going to use the scaffolding around the building and it's safer. Or you can say, I'm going to go with contractor B because he's going to do it with a crane. It's the same roof that's getting putting on. So we're looking at different options at that point.
We've got this slide up. New strata corporations have 2510 warranty. And I think a lot of people forget that the roof is part of the 5-year building enclosure warranty, part of the building envelope system. And again, I wouldn't be waiting until year 4 to inspect the roof. Roofs are kind of out of sight, out of mind on new construction. So they're not going to last 30 years. They typically on townhouse complexes of new construction, 15 to 22 years is where we start to see the roof cycle, the life of the roof cycle itself coming to an end. So, how to deal with this, but I think a lot of strata corporations really forget that that roofing system is part of your warranty. And you should be filing claims. You should be getting an inspection done before year 5 and filing claims for the warranty work that needs to be done on the roof. Because we oftentimes will come across strata corporations at year 7 or 8 who now have a defect and they're paying a roofer to come and repair the roofing system, which might be in trouble, or they've hired a consultant to look at it to discover this was really a warranty claim.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, there's a number of reasons why you want to do annual maintenance anyways. I mean, everything that I talked about before about making sure that your roof is in tip-top shape every year applies to this as well. And one of the things that, like for instance, the manufacturers of the roofing products will do, one of the first things they'll do is they'll ask you to prove that you've been doing the maintenance properly on your building. And they'll look for ways to try and get out of their coverage of their warranty. And that's one of the ways that they'll try and get out of it. So if you can't prove that you've been doing what's required, or even just what's good practice, reasonable good practice for your building, they'll use that as leverage to try and get out of coverage of anything. And when it comes to a new building that's still within the 5 years, it's even tougher because at that point you've got general contractors, you've got developers who hired roofing contractors to do the work, and there's guarantees within guarantees and responsibilities and a lot of finger pointing that happens. So if you're not on top of it, it's very difficult to come in slightly later at the 4.5 or 4.75 year mark and try and put in a claim for something that really should have been dealt with earlier on in the the life of the roof. And just sort of addressing, sorry, I've got a cat that's constantly bothering me here. It's typical for when you're doing one of these. When you're talking about the warranty of a roof system in general, there's a lot of misnomers out there about how long a roof should last. You mentioned 35 years. I think in my whole time, 30 plus years in the roofing industry, I've seen very, very few, maybe I can count them on one hand, number of roofs that were 35 or older, of certain kinds of products. There are some roof systems that will last that long without a problem, but the more common roof systems typically don't. They're 20 to 25 years is a generally accepted lifespan. And as you mentioned, anywhere from 15 to 25 years, you could be seeing various failure rates or degenerative rates of that roof system, depending on a number of factors. Again, weather, exposure, installation practices, type of material used, and the rest of the building's construction as well. Because if the building's built poorly and the substrate isn't fastened well, or they used a really cheap plywood or a really thin plywood or whatever the case may be, those will directly affect the performance of the roof system too. And
apologies to everybody. It appears that we're having a few little online internet connection challenges today. So if we miss something, drop us a note and we'll try and recapture it. I think that when we're looking at a new roofing system in an older strata property, so townhouse complex, 35 years old, but they replaced the roof 10 years ago. Or 5 years ago, they replaced the roof finally, or it's the second roof in the cycle of the building. Again, it comes to the same issue. They may have actually looked at warranties. They may have talked about options for warranties. And I think this is also an issue for the public. Is a warranty or a guarantee provided for by a contractor, or is this a third-party warranty through something like the Roofing Contractors Association? Is this something that actually, they can rely on independently if this contractor fails? So I'll get you to talk about that with respects to, older building, we're putting in a new roof. What options do we have here?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. There are a couple things. In our contracts that we develop and our specifications that we develop, as a rule, we ask for the contractors to provide a minimum 5-year corporate warranty, regardless of any other warranties that may be purchased as part of the project. And you mentioned the RCA BC Roof Star Guarantee, which is certainly something that's available. It's a separate third-party guarantee that is provided or purchased by the owners of a building that covers the roof, away from the manufacturers and away from the actual roofing contractor. There's a number of factors that go into that decision to do that. But it's very important to make sure you know what your warranties are, so that when the problem comes up, who do you call? Because you may own a roof, but if there's a leak, who are you going to call? Do you know who the roofer is? Do you have the contract, the original contract that the roof was installed under? And in there, it should have copies of their warranty, their corporate warranty. It should have copies of the manufacturer's warranty paperwork. And if you do have an RCA BC guarantee, it should have copies of that as well. In the case of the third-party guarantee, the RCA BC one, that is a product where basically if the roofing contractor fails to respond when you're trying to contact them, the RCA BC will step in and either get that contractor to start responding to your issue, or they'll send another contractor out to deal with your issue. So it's a very handy warranty in that sense, because it gives you another layer of protection, if you will, over trusting the contractor's corporate warranty, which in some cases can be not worth very much, particularly if you go with a smaller company who has less to lose. And if there's a major issue on a building, they may just shut down and not honor their warranty at all.
So it kind of dovetails into one of the questions that came up, though, which is really kind of interesting, but it does identify this with warranties. We see this very frequently with townhouse complexes. Oftentimes we see a lot of skylights in the units, or large skylights. How do the skylights interact with the warranty process? So we're dealing with the warranty. So when the roofing is redone, if we're not replacing the skylights, how do we deal with the warranty process at the same time?
Yeah, this becomes a bit of a tug of war, and it's the same with things like air conditioners mounted on the roof system, or chimneys that weren't dealt with during the actual roofing process. So if you go to replace a roof and you decide to keep the existing skylights on your building, let's say you just installed them 10 years ago, your roof is 25 years old, but you still want to get the remaining life out of those skylights, that's fine, as long as they're in good condition. But what happens is the roofer has to remove that skylight in order to properly, and I'll say properly, install the roof system. There are ways he can do it without taking it off, similar to what I mentioned earlier, where he may not open up the walls to put the underlay up the walls. He has to bring the underlay and the flashings up the sides of the skylight curb, and should bring membrane up and over the top of that curb. So you have to take the skylight off to do that. So he could do this work and then he could put the skylight back on. Now, where's the line? The line is basically at the top of the curb. So if there's an issue with that area where the skylight is, you're going to automatically call the roofer. The roofer is going to come in, he's going to check his back pan, he's going to check his flashings on the side of the curb, he's going to check the shingles around the curb, and then he's going to say, nope, it's your skylights that's leaking, right? So most roofing contractors will not provide a guarantee on an existing skylight when they're reinstalling it, because they have no control over the seals within that skylight. And they are disturbing that product when they take it off and they put it back on. So it's a bit of a high risk move on everybody's part to try and reuse them. The owner is taking a bit of responsibility and asking for them to be reused, because he has to accept the responsibility of any leakage that occurs from the actual skylight itself. The frame, the seals within the skylight, we're going to become the owner's responsibility. If water gets into the curb just underneath the frame of the skylight, well, that would be the roofer's problem, because he didn't seal it or reinstall it and fasten it down tight enough to seal off the top of the curb. So this is where the finger pointing can happen. And if you have a chimney chase, for instance, with one pipe coming through the top of it, and it's a big box, you see them on quite a few townhouse buildings, there's a metal cap on top of that chase that actually covers and caps the whole chase. Quite often, those don't get changed when a roof is replaced. And what happens is they may be at the same age and state of disrepair that the original roof was, but nobody thinks to look at them and change them. So the roof gets done, and all of a sudden there's a hole that develops in that chimney chase cap, and it starts leaking within the building. Well, whose fault is that? It's coming from the roof. The roofer didn't do his work right. Well, no. Two things. The roofer didn't point out to you that you should change those. The consultant didn't point out to you that you should change those. Hopefully he would. And then you didn't ask to have them changed. So it's sort of like changing 3 tires on a car, right? You're not changing everything. So quite often what I recommend people to do is change the skylights at the same time as the roof, and try and keep them under, so the skylight's warranty then becomes part of the roofing warranty, because it was all renewed at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, the moral of the story here is that with a reasonable roof, the comparable life cycle of a reasonable skylight is about the same. So it's really worth just simply replacing them both at the same time.
Assuming they were installed at the same time, yes. I mean, obviously, we're not going to try and make you spend money if you've got a 5-year-old skylight and it costs you $800 to buy it.
Right.
But you have to understand that there is, coming with that savings of reusing that skylight, comes a bit of a risk, right? Well, that nobody's going to want to take except you.
Well, and we've seen this with major building upgrades for building envelopes as well. Reuse of windows is also a poor economy, because the windows, when they're removed, the miter joints are broken. The window system itself is twisted. The windows themselves may be physically broken. In the reinstallation of it, the labor cost is oftentimes more than simply having installed new windows in the first place. It is a poor economy.
Yeah, the nice thing though about skylights is that they are easily replaceable after the fact. So if you did decide to defer the cost of a new skylight until year 2 after a new roof was installed, you could easily change it without affecting the roof system. Right. Whereas a window is built into the wall. It's a lot different.
So just the Strata has purchased a new roof. They've gone through the process. This is one of the big challenges, this checklist here. This is one of the big challenges that strata corporations really face. Oftentimes when we're dealing with a strata corporation that has You know, they're now facing their leaks. They're trying to deal with it. No one has copies of the information. You know, they don't have copies of the reports, the information. We certainly encourage everybody to try and create a website that everyone can use where all of this information and documentation can be hosted. You know, everything that happens afterwards has an impact on things like allowances for your annual budget. They, you know, are, you know, warranty inspections, what's our maintenance obligations and repairs. And I think oftentimes we as the consumer forget that just because a roof is installed doesn't mean our responsibilities are over. You know, we're in a contractual relationship with the warranty where we do have to do maintenance and repairs to be able to defend that we've met the conditions of the warranty. So I don't know if there's any extra pitfalls that you can see in that there at all.
Well, it is very important to make sure that you're keeping all that documentation. Absolutely. One source of comfort can be that the roofing contractor should also be keeping a copy of that, and so should the consultant. And in the case of the RCABC, if they're involved, they would have a copy of it as well. So if these documents did get lost for some reason, there is a chance, if you've involved the right people in the project, that there are copies available and they can be sourced out, you know, as quick as a phone call. And we do get calls from people going, we just don't have a copy of our spec. Can you send us another copy?
Right.
So it just sort of enforces or reinforces the value of having some professional people involved in the project.
I was going to say, I think you've covered most of choosing a consultant kind of in your opening, but if there's anything else you want to add. And from the consumer perspective, these are all great questions on a checklist, but there are questions that you want to, you know, for example, do you have errors and emissions insurance? Get a copy of the insurance policy. Don't just assume somebody says, yes, we have insurance. As a condition, provide a copy of the policy. If you've used a consultant and you've spec'd this job out and gone to a tender, that should probably be a condition of the tender, a provision of providing verification and evidence of insurance to meet the requirements of the job.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just important that your contractor, the roofing contractor, has proper insurance, but your consultant should too. I mean, our company does, and we often get asked to add people on as additional insurers in part of our coverage to make sure that, you know, everybody is well taken care of. It's very important. You know, the other things to look for when you're choosing a consultant are their work experience. You know, do they actually know how to install a roof system? Have they actually worked on a roof system? In my case, I'm a ticketed journeyman roofer before I became a consultant, so I have experience slogging it out on the buildings. Are they accredited from IBEC? Being a registered roof observer is an important indicator as to whether or not they're professional and that they pay attention to the ethical obligations of being a consultant, being independent and acting on behalf of the owners. All of this goes hand in hand with making sure you have a good roofer. You also want to make sure you have a good consultant. You don't want to get led astray by you know, somebody who's trying to lead you in the wrong direction. Will they actually go up on a roof? I've actually been handed cameras by other consultants who did not want to go on a certain sloped roof, and they wanted me to go up and take pictures for them. I'll go on any roof. You know, obviously I'll do it safely, but I'll go on any roof, and a good consultant should be willing to do that. That's how you can see things. You can't fly a drone up and look at things. You can look at a broad view of a building. You can stand in a window and look at a roof and get a broad view of it, but you're not actually going to be able to go up and touch and feel and poke and prod at the actual roof system to see whether things are bonded well, to see whether things are sealed well, to see whether the sealants have bonded to the substances they're being bonded to. All these things are important. And it's sort of like the fine points of making sure the roof system's actually going to perform versus just look like it's performing.
Let me skip through the next few slides because we have a number of slides here that just simply illustrate different types of roofing systems. So this roofing system here is really common in British Columbia on wood frame buildings, on wood frame condos, apartment buildings, four-floor buildings. This is incredibly common. And of course, this is the type of roofing system that we most frequently get complaints about failures and leaks.
Yeah, there's an awful lot going on with this roof system. I mean, you can see the two different types of roofing on this building. The gray area is the flat membrane area, or what I call a bathtub area. You can see the high walls around that area that can hold water. You can also see a number of penetrations in that roof system all the little dots on the gray area are all vents and curbs and skylights and whatever else. These are all points of possible water ingress. So as the water level rises, all those have to be sealed properly. But now let's add in the brown area around the building, which is a completely different type of roof system with its own challenges and its own detailing. So there's two basic systems up here with numerous detailing issues that have to be addressed. And then the complexity of actually doing this project. It's a large project. It involves working around everybody's residences and trying to stay out of their way and impact the owners as little as possible. Roofing is a very loud and violent process. The removal can be very invasive. The work around the building can be quite invasive. So it all has to be planned out accordingly and approached by a contractor who's well-versed in how to work on buildings like this. You can't just, show up with a hammer and a knife and do a job like this.
Surprising how many people do.
Yeah, I know. And this is another building. Sorry, Tony. It's another building that's actually very much similar, but this is a high-rise. So this one has the two different types of roof systems. In this case, it's a flat roof system, and then a sloped metal panel roof system, the green areas. So this one has even more challenges because of the height. And if you look at the landscaping around the building, it's very hard to get to this building. There is a parking area on the one side by the looks of it. But still, you need to get a crane that's big enough to reach the top of the building. It has to be supported by solid ground. It can't be over a parkade. And then the workers have to be protecting themselves and protecting the public below from any falling debris or falling roofing material, falling hammers, falling knives, whatever it is. It's a very complicated process to install or to remove and then install a roof system on a building like this. So we're going to go through a couple of different types of roof systems here real quickly. So what we're showing here is just sort of a breakout of an EPDM roof system, which is a rubber roof system. And it's a single ply membrane that's installed quite often on a flat roofing, a flat slope or flat surface on a building. Goes down very quick. It can be very cost effective in that sense because it's cost less to install because of the quickness that it goes down. However, it is only a single ply. And so if you do have a breach within that single ply of membrane, it leaks immediately. There is no secondary layer of buildup underneath there to stop water coming in. So it has its place in the roofing market. It just is not applicable to every building out there. This is an example of a rubber roof system that we installed actually on a warehouse building. And it's a very clean looking surface. This one doesn't have the rock on it. Some have river rock on it to act as a ballast. This one happens to be a fully adhered system. So it's actually a glued down membrane, but it's still a single ply. This is another version of a single ply roof system. In this case, it would be almost exactly the same, except it's a thermoplastic polyolefin roof system, or TPO, which goes down similarly, but it's hot air welded rather than being glued at all the joints. So it takes a little bit more technique to install this type of roof system. You need to know how to work the hot air welders and how to roll all the joints properly. So it's definitely a skilled, a technical system to install, not something you just grab the material and go with. And here's an example of how that looks. So highly reflective coating. Not that that's important in our market. We don't have enough sunny days in BC to really make having a reflective roof system valuable. And quite often they end up very dirty and algae coated in a short period of time. But this type of roof system can be a very good roof system for a large warehouse building, as you see here. I don't know that I would put it on a residential building. This is another breakdown of a typical sloped roof, much like the one we saw earlier. You can see the plywood exposed onto the left side there. You can see some wall interfaces there. Tony, if you can just show where that the wall sheathing is showing. That's sort of what I'm talking about, where if you don't outline in the specification, is the roofer supposed to carry that membrane up the walls and deal with the walls? How is that going to be dealt with? Or is it going to be dealt with? Is it just going to be left tied into, and you're using old material to tie into new material? It's not a good practice. You see solar panels, sorry, that's actually underlayment. It looked like solar panels there. Yeah. But the underlayment is there to act as a secondary protection under the roof system. And then you have your shingles and your ridge capping. Ridge venting is something that we install quite a bit. It's a very nice looking way to vent your building. You don't see the roof acne of multiple different vents up on the roof. It's very effective if it's done properly, but it has to be done properly.
Do you go into attic spaces at all when you're looking at buildings?
I do. Being 6'2", it's a little tricky sometimes, but I do it. And it is necessary to make sure that we can, as soon as you go into an attic, you can usually tell. If it's really hot and humid in the attic, there could be a number of issues going on there. There could be pipes that are disconnected from bathroom fans that are spewing moist air into the attic. There could be dryers actually vented into the attic. And you could just have no venting, no breathing within the attic space at all, which causes all the heat soak from your shingles. It soaks within to the attic space, and then that heat stays in there, and it ends up cooking back out on the shingles. So it's not a good thing to have poor venting in there. But we do review attics to make sure that the venting is going to be good, and also checking things like pipes and that. And during the actual roof installation process, we quite often have to go into an attic to make sure the roofers have cut out the vent holes properly. Because once the vent is installed, you can't tell.
Right. I was going to say the number one complaint that we get across the province in townhouses is disconnected or not connected venting systems for dryers and kitchen fans. Yeah. It's surprising the number of them that have been that simply blow into the attic spaces without proper venting, and they either historically were never connected up to the exterior, or when the roofing was replaced, the new venting was not connected properly.
Yeah, and this can lead to an issue that comes up quite often, where defining the scope of work is important, because the roof is actually what happens on top of the sheathing, right? So you can call the whole top section from your ceiling up the roof of the building, but in actuality, when you're calling a roofer in to replace the roof, he's replacing everything on the sheathing, right? So the pipes within your ceiling, within the insulation that's been blown into your attic space, are technically not part of the roofing process. So unless that's defined in the scope of work that they're to go in and check all of those and retape them and re-outfit them, whatever needs to be done, then it won't get done as part of the roofing process. And you can't then call back the roofer and say, well, you never fixed my dryer pipe. Well, that wasn't part of the scope of work. So that's where it goes back to defining the scope of work before the process actually gets started and addressing those issues, right?
Yeah, in the next slide here, you have asphalt shingles. And one of the questions from Kelowna is the Strata has had wood shingles for since the building was built 15 years ago, and they're coming to their life cycle now. They're treated softwood shingles, and the Strata are, they're going to look at alternatives. Is it a much of a construction difference when you go from a wood shingle to an asphalt shingle, and is it much of a cost difference, or are there real benefits and pluses for them to look at?
That's a good question, and it's a long topic, but I'll try and shorten it as much as I can. Cedar roofing has declined in recent years. It's not as popular as it used to be. So coming along with that decline in it being installed, we have less qualified cedar installers available. So the bidding pool for getting a good group of contractors together that can reinstall or install new cedar is tough. So you might be having to bring in some contractors that aren't necessarily the greatest in order to have a decent sized bidding pool. We usually like to have 5 contractors, but sometimes you might want more, you might want less. The actual process is, it's actually quicker to convert a roof system to asphalt shingles than it is to reinstall cedar shingles. And that's because cedar is a little bit slower to install in general, right? So even though you have to take off the cedar and then install plywood sheathing over the existing strapping and rafters, that process is still quicker because the installation of the asphalt shingles is actually quicker than installing cedar for cedar, right? The quality of cedar these days it's harder to find good quality cedar. It's still out there, but you have to search a little harder, and the cost is definitely higher. So even though there's more work involved physically for the workers to actually take off that roof system, install the plywood, install the underlayment, install the asphalt shingles, it'll happen quicker and it'll be cheaper than trying to install a new cedar system. Now, the other factor is, if you have an old cedar roof system, more than likely in the middle of winter, particularly in BC, it's slimy and you can't go on it. So if you have a leak from a pipe or a skylight or a chimney in the middle of winter, you have to call a roofing contractor up, and he has to put on cleated boots, spike boots, and he has to walk across your roof, which is already brittle because it's an old cedar roof and it's cracking under his foot. And he's putting holes, indentations with those spikes in all of the cedar as he's walking to the leak area. So he's further compounding the potential for the roof to fail by actually going to correct that roof. Whereas if you have an asphalt shingle roof system like the one in the photo, it has a fine granular surface that's embedded into the top of the shingles, like a sandpaper, which actually makes it very easy to walk on in any weather with running shoes on. So you're not damaging those shingles. It's safer to access the roof. So from a liability standpoint, as the building owner, you're not asking a contractor to put themselves at risk, or if you're the kind of homeowner that goes up on the roof yourself, you're not taking as big a risk by going onto an asphalt shingle roof because of that grip factor of the product itself versus an older cedar roof, which is like a slip and slide. Right?
Yeah, no, exactly, and that's it. So the conversion, given where you are, there's also a lower fire risk with
Yeah.
asphalt shingles, which people should be mindful of, and the grade and the quality of the asphalt shingle that you select, and the appearance can also have a significant impact.
Yeah, it really changes the look of the buildings immediately. Whereas if you're putting on a new cedar roof system, they look beautiful, golden, shiny the day that it's finished. And within 2 years, they're turning gray. Right. So immediately it's, well, not immediately, but 2 years later it's changing, and then it's transitioning to the brown that you see, and eventually a lime green brown with all the algae and stuff that ends up growing on it, because the algae comes with the product. The product itself is a natural product and comes with the algae and bacteria built into it from the forest. So naturally, there's been a lot of cases where I've gone up on roofs and they're already rotting. They have dry rot even on the underside of the shingles and the shakes, because the algae came with the product and it was reactivated over time. It just lays dormant for a while, and then it gets reactivated from moisture and everything, and eventually it starts to feed on the shingle, and it's a self-compounding problem. So from that standpoint, you're putting on a commercially made product that is basically laboratory designed, and it's going to go on as perfect as the manufacturer can spit it out. And then you're going to be able to rely on that product versus harvesting logs that may be of good quality, bad quality, good quality, bad quality, all mixed together. And then you have to try and hope that they're all great quality.
This is the torch-on roof system, which we also frequently associated with fires on roofing, if there's if there is not great caution that is managed.
Yeah, it's a two-ply system. So this is a very common roof system installed in British Columbia. One of my preferred flat roofing systems. It's what I used to install a lot when I was an installer. It involves putting down a base layer over top of either the substrate, separation layers, coverboard layers, or an insulation layer, depending on how you build the roof system. Often, if it's a dead flat substrate, you put a sloped insulation package so that you can actually create a water plane that diverts the water to the drains. But it's a heat applied system in this case that we're showing here that's actually welded together. The two layers are welded together with offset laps to create one welded assembly at the end of the day. And it has a granular surface on it, much like the shingles, available in different colors, so you can complement the look of your building if it's visible, or even sometimes from the sky, people like to make sure they have a complementary color. What we're seeing now with this product is they're going to be trending towards flameless solutions, where you have base ply layers that are installed with self-adhesive bonding to the substrate or whatever, or the insulation, whatever it happens to be, and a self-adhesive laps. So you're not actually using a flame to install the base ply layer, which gets you to a waterproof level on the roof. And then you can go back and you can either torch apply the cap sheet, or you can also self-apply or self-adhere the cap sheet. So that's kind of the future of that product that we're seeing.
Right.
Coming. Okay, so this slide, we're talking about maintenance cycles. And we've kind of touched on this earlier.
Yeah.
You really need to make sure you're on top of your roof. And I don't mean that literally, but I do. In that you have to make sure that you don't forget about it for 5 years and then, think, well, I better get some work done, because what's going to happen? You're going to call a roofer out. He has a much bigger job to do now, and potentially he's going to uncover or have to correct issues that have happened due to the negligence. Whereas if you have somebody come in every year or semi-annually, in the case of a building that's surrounded by trees and it takes a weather beating, like I mentioned before, these are going to go a long way to making your roof last longer. It may be a minor capital outlay on an annual basis or semi-annual basis to pay for the roofer or the consultant or both to come in and review your roof and do some work on your roof. But in the long run, you're going to get an extra few years out of your roof. You're going to get the actual lifespan you were supposed to get, or at least be able to deal with the issues that do develop. If there's workmanship issues that develop at the 10-year mark or whatever the case may be, you can deal with them before they become too costly. And that's important, particularly when you're dealing with a very large strata building that could affect hundreds of people if there's a leak in the building.
We never underestimate the essential necessity of maintenance. You talked about this already. You know, people are often sold the bill that, you know, this is a 35-year roof, you're not going to need anything else. But there are so many things that affect that. But there was a good question that came up that, in my experience, because I have done both in the last 5 years, and the question is, why does it appear that a strata roof or a multifamily roof is more expensive than a detached home? And I have to say, having done both in the last 5 years, I found the actual opposite to be true. If you actually do create a good specification and you go to a good bidding process for a well-installed quality roof that is going to give you a lot of life expectancy, because of the quantity that you're doing with such a much larger area, you have a much better negotiating power as a strata corporation.
You do, but there are a number of factors that play into doing a roof on a large building versus doing a single family residence. And they can either help or hinder the cost of the project. One is that accessing the building, if it's a very steep external sloped roof, like the one we showed in that first picture of the two different roof systems on that one large building, you may have to have scaffolding around the whole building, whereas a house being lower to the ground, a much smaller structure, you don't necessarily need that. You just put a ladder up and you can work from a rope. You might need cranes to bring in several different crane deliveries to reach the building and bring material and equipment up to the roof, which will add to the cost of the roof system. So conversely to that, though, is the fact that you're buying, you know, hundreds of squares worth of product, and you're going to get a better deal on that product because of the economy of scale. So they sort of play against each other to bring the cost down. And what also happens is, from a market perspective, roofers really like the big jobs because they can park a crew on it and leave them there for a long time. And the management in the office doesn't have to think about much except making sure the job is going well. So from that perspective, they really like to get those jobs. It's sort of a comfort thing for them. If they had to go to a different building every single day, there's a lot of mobilization and demobilization. There's a lot of arranging that has to happen for each individual roofing project, not to mention office work and paperwork that goes along with it. One warranty on a strata building versus one warranty on every single building on a street, you know, in the Lower Mainland. It's a lot more paperwork. So they're able to give you, they're fighting harder to get the job. They're getting better pricing on the materials. They might even get a better rate if they're subbing out some of the installation to workers because of the volume. So it might offset the cost of those extra things like scaffolding and craning.
When we're ready at the time to start looking at our roof. And so a good example, depreciation report I looked at the other day, has the roof scheduled for replacement in 2025. And that did not involve the depreciation planner. You know, they asked, he physically did not go on the roof. He's just basing this on the age of the building. So there's been no roof assessment, but you know, 2025, I'd say this year is the time to probably be getting a consultant, look at the roof, spend the time to look at, you know, maintenance, look at whether there are any deficiencies, whether the roof maybe needs to be replaced next year versus 2025, or it's already past its life cycle. It's a tough thing for people to plan for, but by the time everybody plans for how they're going to raise the money, scheduling the contracts, doing the bidding process, you know, going through everything that they're through, it's usually a year or two ahead of when they're actually scheduling to have the roof done, at least when they're looking at the renewal cycle.
Yeah, you want to be well aware of the status of your roof system before its demise. For a number of factors. Tony, I'm sure you've been to strata meetings where they're voting on whether or not to go forward with a roof replacement, and they just don't get enough votes to go ahead.
Yeah.
And then what? Then the whole process has to start all over again because the bids are going to expire, so all those prices are going to become irrelevant. The time of year that the roofing could be installed, depending on the location of the building, may be expiring. We might be going into winter now. So now you have to wait a full season to just start the same process all over again to try and get the product onto the building. In the meantime, the roof is continuing to age, continuing to fail. If you're already having leaks, they're continuing to get worse. So it's too little too late. But if you're ahead of the game and you're having the roof reviewed annually, and it's being watched and monitored as to what state it's in, you can not only make those minor corrections to try and make sure it's going to last long enough to get through the whole voting and approval process with a strata, but you're not going to have a lot of big issues where, you know, multiple units are going to get rained on and you're going to have catastrophic leakage or something like that. The process to install a roof system or to design a roof system can take a little while too. I mean, from the initial phone call to get familiar with a building, it takes us time as consultants to go out and review the building, figure out what's going wrong with it, figure out what we need to do with it, talk with the strata about what they want to do, how much they want to spend, what the plans are for the building. Do they want a roof because they're going to sell it in 2 years? Do you want a roof because everybody's going to stay there for another 20 to 25 years? And sometimes those are really important decisions that come into play when they're choosing the roof system. Not so much what kind of roof system, it's just the other factors that come into play. So having the time to deal with all of that and have the meetings, have information meetings, have SGMs to vote on things is very important. The typical bid during a tender process is only valid for 60 days. So if you can't get the process to the point where you're ready to call for an SGM after the bids come in, because you have to, what is it, 22 days, Tony, that you have to for noticing?
20, but yes.
20 days.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to provide that notice and get everything happening so you can vote on it while the bids are still valid, or the contractors can jack the prices up again.
Right.
And you start the whole process again.
Well, and if you're in a strata corporation that has a history, this is another problem we've come across. If you have a history of not approving levies or you have no reserve funds that you can spend on the roof, you then run into the problem of contractors not wanting to bid on your roofs projects in the future.
Yeah.
And that's another problem for the public that we get through. One of the questions, I'm just going to flip through here because we're running out of time, but one of the questions that comes up, which is a great question, is how do we find a consultant in Prince George or Kelowna or Victoria? And we know there's consultants across the province. So
yeah, the best resource for finding a consultant is to go to the RCABC's website, and they actually will have a list of accepted inspection firms. And you can choose the area that you're in, and you can look at that list and you can choose any one of the consultants on that list. You can also contact IBEC, which is the International Institute of Building Enclosure Consultants, and they might be able to help you out. But the RCABC's membership list is not, we're not actually members of the RCABC, we're just accepted by them. We're third party, but we are still listed on there as their accepted inspection firms. So you can go there and it's a great resource. And everybody that's on that list had to be vetted before they go on that list, and they have to meet certain criteria and maintain that criteria, both the roofing contractors and the consultants that are allowed to do the reviewing of the roofs for the RCABC program. So it's a pre-vetted list of both consultants and roofing contractors. So it takes some of the guesswork out of finding the right contractor or the right consultant, because they've had to jump through the hoops already to get there, right?
Right. So, you know, just as we round out here, when this is your perspective of a scope of work. You know, the client retains you. I'm going to put you on the spot for one quick second.
Sure.
So you know, let's say, again, hard to assess, but 50 unit mid-rise wood frame building. They're due for their first roof at 18 years. What's kind of the cost for the consulting work to basically go through this scope of work? Because as a consultant, you're acting for the strata corporation.
Yeah. So it depends. There's three basic services that we do in general, all consulting companies do. One is condition reporting, to find out exactly what the roof system, what status it's at right now, and to give you some opinions of cost as far as roof replacement or repair. And generally those reports, depending on the complexity of the building, the number of different roof systems, the number of penetrations on the roof, and how complicated it is, they can run anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000. And it depends on the depth you want the consultant to go into. If you want to have a meeting on the roof with the consultant and just have a verbal discussion, it could be done at an hourly rate. But if you need a report that you need to produce to give to the Strata Council, it involves going out and reviewing the building and then sitting down and writing a report that might take you 2 days to put together. Then the specification and tendering portion is roughly the same value as far as cost-wise. And that gets you a document that might be 40 or 50 pages deep that outlines all the different requirements that the roofing contractor has to maintain, a number of men on site, the amount of insurance, what kind of warranty he's supposed to provide you with, restrictions for parking, smoking restrictions, even talking about swearing and on-site performance, where they can set up, where they can't set up. The timeline of the project is usually outlined in there as well. Ground areas that need to be sort of commandeered for the roofing process because they need to store some equipment on the ground. So all these things can be outlined in the specification, and they're usually discussed with the owners ahead of time so that it's taken out of the question marks are taken out ahead of actually going for the bidding. We already know all these answers to the questions that are going to come up. And that's basically what's outlined right here, is just finding the right contractors for the bidding. Are they capable? Do they have the manpower? Do they have the equipment? Have they worked on a building like yours before? We know whether or not they have or not because we've worked with them on other buildings that are similar to yours. So this is where having that background knowledge comes into play rather than just calling a roofer out of the blue, out of the phone book. Invoicing requirements. Are they going to invoice you for materials that they place on the roof and then they're going to walk away for 2 months? We don't allow that. We want them to actually invoice for the amount of material that's been installed on your roof system. And then we want to make sure that that roofing has been installed properly. So that's weighted as well. So for instance, if a contractor invoices for 50%, we want to see not only that it's 50% installed on the building, not just parked on the building, but installed on the building, but also that it's done right. Or we'll ask him to back down that 50% to say 45 because there's some deficiencies that need to be corrected and so forth. So there's a number of factors that go into setting up and running a roofing project that are far beyond simply making a phone call and calling up Johnny's Roofing and saying, can you please, give me a price? It can be very in-depth, particularly on these really complicated strata type buildings.
So you did 2 out of 3. You said 3 basic services. So condition reporting,
the last one, yes.
specs and tendering, and then the last one is that project supervision.
Yeah, it's inspecting, it's project supervision. We call it observations. We're reviewing the work of the contractor. So basically, when they start working, we start working. We come out and periodically and never scheduled. We come out on a surprise basis, and we review the work that they're doing, and we write reports up that get sent to the owners. And these are very valuable, not only for the owners to watch the process going on and for them to have confidence that somebody besides the actual roofer is looking after the project and somebody who actually knows how to install a roof is actually looking after the project. But going back historically, when you have issues 2 years, 3 years after the roof has been installed, you can go back to those reports and you can refer to how the roof system was installed and any issues that had to be corrected during that time. For instance, if part of the roof was left open and the building got wet, was it all dried out properly? We're having a mold issue now. Maybe it wasn't dried out properly during the process. And you can go back to those reports and sort of fine tune your investigation into those issues. So they become very valuable that way.
One more question and we'll call it quits for the day, which is so typical of British Columbia. Because we get so much rain and because of the cycle of the weather, is it common or acceptable to install roofing systems through the fall and the winter?
It happens all year. So roofing doesn't necessarily stop. These guys still have to pay their bills, but what happens is the pace of the roofing slows right down. So for instance, in December, you might have 3 good days of roofing weather in a week where it's not actively raining. It's cold, but it's not actively raining. They can do some work, but then the next week is raining, so they can't work. So where a roofing process might have taken 2 weeks in the best time of the year in the middle of summer, that might be stretched out to 2 months in the middle of winter. Right. You also have much shorter days. So yes, it can happen. The risk to the owners and to the roofing contractor, because they're actually responsible for leakage during the course of construction, but the risk of a leak happening during construction, while there's phased roofing happening, old roofing is still tying into new roofing and such, that's obviously higher when you're working at a time of year where weather is becoming more prevalent. But it does happen all year.
Super. Well, thanks, Sean. Thanks so much. And again,
not a problem.
For our members, if you have any questions, be sure to send Sean an email or you can give him a call. And again, you can go to the RCABC website, Roofing Contractors Association of British Columbia. If you're looking for a list of inspectors across the province, they pretty much cover the whole province jurisdiction-wise. So that's a great resource and a great benefit. And if you have any additional questions regarding roofing, you can send them directly to Sean or you can send them to us and we can source out other resources and information for you. So thanks everyone again today for participating. Thanks again, Sean, for your wisdom and for your guidance on the roofing systems.
Yeah.
I think this is actually about a 3-hour seminar, not a 1-hour seminar.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm like pulling a top. You know, you wind me up and you start me going. I could keep going forever.
It's perfectly okay. I think we might have to be looking at a much more involved session in the next year or two to deal with roofing cycles. But again, thanks everyone, and thanks for your participation.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you very much.
Great.